Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Starting from the 15th of March, the United States has embarked on a relentless campaign of bombing the Houthis in Yemen, as the Houthis have disrupted commercial shipping in the Red Sea corridor in solidarity with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Weapons worth almost about $1 billion have been dropped on Yemen in a matter of days, with very little to show that the American bombardment has deterred the Houthis. Donald Trump had earlier claimed that he will end wars and not start a new one. But now he has posted a new video of the United States dropping a massive bomb on a group of people in Yemen with a claim that they are Houthis who had gathered for instructions for an attack. But the Houthis have responded by saying that what was bombed by the Americans was a traditional tribal gathering of civilians. The United States is also moving a second aircraft carrier, the USS Carl Vinson, to the Middle East. It is also increasing the presence of its B-2 stealth nuclear bombers at its military base in the Diego Garcia Island. And although the United States claims that it is hitting hard at the Houthis, many military analysts say that the real target of this military build-up by the United States is actually Iran. Our next report gets you the details. This chilling video, posted by Donald Trump, will give you a glimpse of what the United States is up to. Trump claims the Houthis will never again be able to sink American ships. Almost $1 billion worth of bombs have been dropped in Yemen in just the last 3 weeks. But to what extent has the United States been able to degrade the capabilities of the Houthis is hard to tell. But what is clear is that the United States, even under Donald Trump, who had claimed that he would end wars and not start a new one, is putting its men and military assets bang in the middle of a conflict in the Middle East to aid its close ally, Israel. On the 3rd of April, 5 people were killed, 5 others were wounded, and 1 was reported missing due to an American airstrike. The death toll in Yemen from the American bombings has now risen to 61, with 139 injured. Even water facilities have been very meticulously bombed.
We are now in the Mansouriya district of Hodeidah province. This is the site that was bombed the previous day. The entire water company, including the water plant and the building housing its management, has been destroyed. This was the only water supply facility in Mansouriya. The US and Israel bombing this place is an act of cowardice. This is a public service facility providing water to civilians. It supplies water to the people. Why did they do this?
But this appears to just be the beginning of this war. The United States is sending an additional carrier strike group led by USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier to the Middle East. Besides this, satellite images have emerged of as many as 6 B-2 stealth nuclear bombers that have been moved in just the last week to the US-British military base on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is in the ideal position for the United States to target Iran, as America's Arab allies have declined the use of American military bases on their soil or their airspace to stage attacks against Iran. The B-2 stealth nuclear bomber is an interesting choice. It can carry America's heaviest bombs and also its nuclear bombs. This is hard nuclear saber rattling by the United States, which has been repeatedly threatening Iran over its nuclear program. But how is Iran responding to the American military build-up?
Nations around the world are angry and upset, and that's just based on what they know. There are many issues and atrocities nations around the world are not even aware of. The anti-Zionist regime and anti-US chants that you see in the streets of Europe and even the United States stems from their limited knowledge. They would do more if they knew more. All I'm saying is this rogue group must be eradicated from Palestine.
The United States has a total of 18 permanent and temporary military bases and over 40,000 of its soldiers stationed in the Middle East. Any attack by the Americans to destroy Iran's nuclear assets, claims Tehran, will put all American assets in the Middle East at risk. So the board has been laid out. The United States is moving its military assets into position. But the question is, Will the United States, along with Israel, try and stage an attack on Iran's nuclear assets, sparking off a much larger regional war? In one of the most devastating attacks this year, at least 18 people were killed, including 9 children, and over 50 others sustained some grievous injuries in the Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih. Russia states that it attacked military personnel, but the Ukrainians have rubbished the Russian statement as misinformation, insisting that what was struck were residential buildings in the hometown of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Negotiations are underway behind the scenes to hammer out a compromise. Even Volodymyr Zelensky is now sounding optimistic, stating that a compromise could be struck within the next 1 month. But how close are we really to arriving at a negotiated settlement in Ukraine? Our next report gets you the details.
On the one hand, there are talks underway to end the Russian war in Ukraine. But on the other, Moscow has not stopped its relentless attacks on the Ukrainian front lines. This footage, released on the 2nd of April, will give you a glimpse of the scale of attacks that are still underway. Moscow now claims to have captured the Razlev settlement in the Donetsk region. A total of 142 targets were hit in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Donetsk. Russia claims all these were ammunition depots, weapons production sites, and temporary bases housing Ukrainian troops and foreign mercenaries. But on the ground in Ukraine, the emergency responders insist that even civilian and commercial infrastructure is being repeatedly hit.
The enemy conducted 15 strikes on 2 civilian enterprises in Kharkiv's Kholodnorsky district. Fires erupted on 1,500 square meters. One of the fires is being put out. The enterprises were operational. They had regular day shifts. They were civilian enterprises. They produced sleds, polypropylene, and non-military products.
In principle, there's a moratorium on attacks on oil and power infrastructure. But that has not stopped the repeated missile and drone strikes on energy grids. The Russian Defense Ministry released this video of the American-manufactured HIMARS rockets, of which they claim they're being used by Ukraine to target the gas metering facility in Suja. Natural gas pipelines and power facilities in Bryansk, Tambov, and Lipetsk have been significantly damaged, causing disruptions in both gas and electricity supplies. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has called into question the moratorium if the clauses of the agreement to not strike at power infrastructure are not adhered to.
We passed the list of violations cited by Andrei Belousov at the meeting of the Security Council to National Security Advisor of the United States, Michael Waltz. I've sent this list to the United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and we have sent it to our representatives at the UN and OSCE, so that they, in general, use the facts to show what the word of the current Ukrainian authorities is worth, if they can be called authorities.
Even at his best, US President Donald Trump is transactional. The American backing for the Ukrainian war effort has been made conditional. In exchange for the American supply of weapons, Trump wants Zelensky to sign a minerals deal. But this is a different minerals deal than what had been presented to Zelensky during his disastrous meeting with Trump at the White House. To sign on this new minerals deal would effectively mean that Ukraine would be signing off on its financial sovereignty to earn Trump's support. So there is reluctance on part of Volodymyr Zelensky to put an ink on paper on a deal whose terms have been changed significantly to the disadvantage of Ukraine. In Bucha, residents attended an Orthodox prayer on the occasion of the 3rd year anniversary of the town's recapture from Russian troops. Speaking to the mourners on the church square in Bucha, Archbishop urged the attendees not to forget the innocent victims. Ukraine and its Western allies have accused Russia of war crimes in Bucha during the several weeks when the town north of Kiev was under Russian occupation. Pictures of dead civilians that had emerged after the Russian forces withdrew had sparked an international uproar and led to further sanctions on Russia by the United States, Britain, and the European Union. But the United States is now keen on striking a deal to end the war in Ukraine.
We have to get Russia, they're losing 2,000 on average, 2,500 people a day, young people, soldiers, Russian, think of that, 2,500 through some days, but on average probably over about a 1 week period, it's 2,712, they say. They're losing those soldiers, they're dying, they're being decimated, and they're not from our country, but they're from other countries, but they're human beings. They're from Russia, they're from Ukraine in this period, most of them, and we're going to get it stopped. It's a senseless war that would have never happened if I was president, and it shouldn't be allowed to go on.
On the front lines, the situation remains desperate. The Ukrainians know they are fighting a losing battle, and they insist they have not yet felt the impact of the ceasefire talks. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier who is now being deployed at the front lines is now reported to be 42. More than weapons, it is manpower that is in acute shortage to take on and stop the Russian soldiers.
At the moment, we haven't felt the ceasefire talks in any way. The boys have been on positions for 26 days. They have been talking since the 10th March. The boys entered positions on the 13th or on the 12th. They haven't felt the talks in any way.
The war has transformed significantly in the last 3 years. 50% of all fighting that is unfolding on the front lines in Ukraine is being done through FPV, or what are known as first-person view drones. So the type of injuries sustained by the soldiers is also different. Few soldiers on the front lines expect that the fighting will end in a matter of weeks. Trump's price to back Ukraine on the back of a minerals deal is perceived to be too high. It is being seen as a pound of flesh that Donald Trump is extracting to back an ally on the frontiers of the American-led NATO military alliance.
Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Turkey over the past 2 weeks in protest at the arrest and jailing of the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. Prosecutors have accused İmamoğlu of corruption, a charge that he has denied. Widely seen as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's main political rival, İmamoğlu, following a symbolic vote after his arrest, has been confirmed as the opposition party's presidential candidate in the next elections that are scheduled to be held in 2028. İmamoğlu's Republican People's Party has labelled his arrest as a coup against what they describe as Turkey's next president. İmamoğlu's detention is being perceived by his supporters as a political move by the government, which seems inclined to hold on to power at any cost. Our next report gets you more.
This is the video posted by Mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, on social media before he was arrested on the 19th of March.
I am sad to say that a handful of people who are trying to usurp the will of our nation are using our police, the security forces of this country, for evil purposes. They deployed hundreds of police officers in front of my home. We are up against severe oppression, but I want you to know that I won't give up. I love you all very much. I entrust myself to our nation. Let the entire nation know that I will stand firm. I will continue to fight against that person and his mindset that used this whole process as a tool.
Interestingly, İmamoğlu's detention came a day after Turkish university had revoked his university degree on grounds that it was falsely obtained. Additionally, His arrest came just days before he was to be formally named the candidate of the main opposition Republican People's Party for the presidential race in 2028. Sparked by İmamoğlu's arrest, demonstrations erupted almost immediately in Istanbul. 3 days later, he was formally arrested and charged with establishing and managing a criminal organization, taking bribes, extortion, unlawfully recording personal data, and rigging a tender. Not just that, he was also suspended from his post as mayor of Istanbul. But by then, in a show of defiance, the universities in Istanbul were reverberating with the chants of "We are not scared, we won't be silenced, we will not obey," which is a common opposition slogan in Turkey. Initially, the protests were relatively small in scale, but soon spread like wildfire to other cities in the country. Protesters, a majority of them young Turks, clashed with the police and were fired upon with rubber bullets and tear gas. Though the protests have been mostly peaceful, more than 2,000 protesters have been detained. Reportedly, it is the worst unrest in the country since 2016, when Erdogan and his AKP government survived an attempted coup. 256 people had lost their lives then in the clashes on the streets of Ankara and Istanbul. These demonstrations, triggered by İmamoğlu's arrest, are also representative of wider concerns over Turkey's shift towards autocracy.
So I think the idea of growing up throughout the same regime makes us a generation who's looking for change, who's looking for a proof to believe that we live in a democracy. What this change going to become, we are looking at the change itself as a valuable thing right now. I think this situation also makes us afraid of the idea of forever, the idea of a power that become a forever for the same people.
It's not just the university students who are protesting the arrest of İmamoğlu. Reportedly, journalists covering the protests have also been detained. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in power for the past 22 years as both Prime Minister and President of Turkey for the Islamist-rooted Justice and Development Party, has condemned the arrests, declaring his government will not surrender to vandalism or street terror. Insisting that Turkey's judiciary is independent, Erdogan and his administration have denied claims of İmamoğlu's arrest being politically motivated. But the opposition is not buying any of it. On the 2nd of April, in the Turkish capital Ankara, tables at usually bustling cafes were empty, and several shops reported a significant drop in customers in response to a call by the main opposition Republican People's Party to halt all shopping for one day. The opposition calls were described by the Turkish government as economic sabotage attempt. Turkey finds itself at crossroads of democracy, accountability, and a future worth fighting for. The question is, will these street protests, the largest in Turkey in more than a decade, albeit described as evil by Erdogan, last to usher in any significant changes?
In the Caribbean nation of Haiti, which is one of the poorest in the world, the security situation has nosedived since the assassination of former President Jovenel Moïse in July 2021. The United Nations estimates that 85% of the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince, is now under the control of 200 gangs operating with impunity. With almost the entire capital under their control, the emboldened armed gangs are increasingly targeting towns in other areas of the country. On the 31st of March, the gang members stormed the town of Mirebalais in central Haiti and released about 500 inmates from prison. A couple of days later, thousands of Haitians took to the streets of Port-au-Prince, expressing their anger against the armed gangs. Our next report gets you more.
Located on the crossroads of two main roads, the central town of Mirebalais is 50 kilometers northeast of the capital, Port-au-Prince. On Monday, it came under attack from members of two gangs, the 400 Mawozo and a group that calls itself Taliban. Both these gangs form part of the Vive Ansam gang coalition and are in control of northern parts of Port-au-Prince. Locals reported that heavily armed men had shot at passers-by and buildings and proceeded to set ablaze buildings and cars. Even the local police station was not spared, and 500 inmates were freed from jail. Though police officials, bolstered by extra force deployed to the town, later claimed to have regained control of Mirebalais. Reportedly, many of the escaped inmates were still roaming the streets. The 400 Mawoso is infamous for kidnapping people for ransom and have often targeted buses traveling to and from the capital. The Taliban gang, on the other hand, has its stronghold in Canaan, a suburb in the north of Port-au-Prince. The attack by the two gangs is being perceived as an attempt to gain control of key roads leading from their areas into the countryside, in an expression of anger against the armed gangs and the government's failure to hold them off. Thousands of Haitians carrying banners and palm fronds took to the streets of the capital on Wednesday denouncing gang violence.
Look at what happened the day before yesterday in the Mirebalais commune. They know that the policemen arrested some men for illegal gun transportation. Those men were in Mirebalais jail. The gangs of Canaan couldn't get money from the people anymore because Mirebalais was blocked. The authorities gave Vive Ansanam access to Mirebalais, but we, the residents of the Solino neighborhood, we want to return home and we will go home anyway.
The protest, which had begun peacefully, soon escalated into chaos. Reportedly, at least a dozen of the protesters were armed and opened fire on officers who responded just outside the offices of the Prime Minister and the Transitional Presidential Council. Schools, banks and other businesses remained shuttered through the day. This is the first major protest to hit the administration of Alex Didier Fils-Haïm, whom the Transitional Presidential Council appointed as Prime Minister last November.
Do you see what is happening? Everything is so clear today. We can see what is happening. The men from the gang alliance came wearing police clothing to disturb the population. Today everything is so clear. I swear that wherever the population goes, this will follow them. They know I am not afraid and nothing will frighten me. Today Haitian people will fight to be free already. We are free. So those men today cannot stand up and frighten me.
On 28th of March, the UN rights chief Volker Turk had cited reports estimating that between 270,000 and 500,000 firearms were circulating illegally in Haiti, with most weapons in the hands of gangs. Turk further opined that these trafficked firearms are fueling the destructive cycle of violence. According to the United Nations figures, more than 5,600 people were killed in Haiti last year due to gang violence. In addition to this, 2,212 people were injured and 1,494 kidnapped last year. The Kenyan-led multinational security support mission in Haiti since 2023 has so far proven ineffective, with no let-up in the gang violence. An impoverished nation of more than 11 million people, taken hostage by an estimated 7 major gang coalitions, is fervently praying to break free from this vicious cycle of gang violence.
In South Sudan, the world's youngest nation, the hard-won gains of the past 7 years are at serious risk of being lost. For several weeks now, tensions have been building up between South Sudan's President Salva Kiir and his longtime rival, South Sudan's first Vice President, Riek Machar. On the 26th of March, Machar's party, Sudan's People's Liberation Movement in opposition, said that an armed convoy led by the top security officials, including the country's defense minister and the chief of national security, had forcefully entered into Machar's residence in the capital city of Juba and had delivered an arrest warrant. Machar's wife, Angelina Teny, who is the country's interior minister, was also detained along with him. The United States has urged the authorities to free Machar, while the United Nations, the African Union and other neighboring nations have all expressed their concern. The detention of Machar has effectively collapsed the 2018 peace deal and has pushed the impoverished nation to the brink of yet another civil war. Our next report gets you more details.
Is the Republic of South Sudan heading back to another civil war? The August 2018 peace deal that ended the 5-year civil war and brought President Salva Kiir and his longtime rival Riek Machar into a fragile power-sharing agreement is effectively null and void after the house arrest of Machar, along with his wife and 2 bodyguards on 26th of March. The 2013 to 2018 civil war between the rival forces had killed nearly 400,000 people. Over the last 7 years, the relationship between President Salva Kiir and First Vice President Riek Machar had soured. Renewed clashes were reported between forces loyal to the two rivals in the northern town of Nasir in the oil-rich Upper Nile state. Last month, the United Nations reported the use of barrel bombs in airstrikes during fighting between the army and a rebel group previously linked to Machar. A couple of days after the house arrest, the information minister and government spokesperson accused Machar of seeking to launch a rebellion against the government.
This is in accordance with the intelligence report and security and intelligence reports that Dr. Riek Machar, the first Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan and the Chairman of the SPLM-AIO, the Chairman and Commander-in-Chief of the SPLM-AIO, had all this time been in contact with his people, with his bases, and as a result of these contacts, a lot of things happened within the month of March. As you know very well, the first thing that started was when the White Army decided to assemble and attack the Nasir garrison.
On the same day, the United Nations Secretary Antonio Guterres, while declaring that the 2018 peace agreement was in shambles, urged the country's leaders to put down the weapons and prioritize the people of South Sudan.
Let's not mince words. What we are seeing is darkly reminiscent of the 2013 and 2016 civil wars, which killed 400,000 people. All the dark clouds of a perfect storm have descended upon the people of the world's newest country and one of the poorest. The peace agreement is in shambles. A humanitarian nightmare, with about 3 out of 4 South Sudanese needing assistance, half the population severely food insecure, and cholera breaking out.
The rapidly escalating situation has been exacerbated by the deployment of Ugandan troops and their battle tanks into South Sudan, following the request of President Salva Kiir. On Thursday, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni arrived in South Sudan, heightening fears of a return to civil war. Museveni's arrival, the first by a head of state after Machar's house arrest, follows that of African Union mediators who landed in the capital, Juba, on Wednesday for talks with Kiir. Clashes have been reported in parts of the impoverished country, already leading to the displacement of more than 60,000 people. If the rival parties don't overcome the political mistrust, the explosive situation could soon snowball into a full-scale war.
And with that's the wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.